So welcome back. We continue on chapter 51, which we began last week. And we did take the time last week to explain the Alter Rebbe's entry into this Perik of L'Tesis Biur. He spoke about a Yenuka on page 35, which carried the message then and subsequent chapters, explaining this Yenuka. We explained also who was this Yenuka, but Perik Nun Aleph, the Alter Rebbe brings, and as we mentioned last week, this is the conclusion of the entire Likutei Amorim, Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, Nun Gimel, the 51st, 52nd chapter, and 53rd chapter, which the Alter Rebbe felt important to give an additional explanation, not there, but here, again, which becomes the conclusion of the entire Likutei Amorim, additional explanation of the expression of the Yenuka, which we brought before, and the Alter Rebbe is depicting, namely, this expression of the Yenuka here, of the Ashras Hashchina, which also the message there as well, but he focuses in on this idea of Ashras Hashchina, the dwelling of the divine presence. What is that supposed to mean? Again, we try to elaborate a bit on the question, to explain when the Alter Rebbe says, what is it supposed to mean, Ashras Hashchina? And basically the idea, again, as you see this in these two lines, the Alter Rebbe's question, Ma'in Yoneh, what does it mean, the dwelling of the divine presence? And apparently, Lesasar Panim Minei, there's no place which is devoid of Hashem. So everywhere you have the dwelling of the divine presence. What does it mean, a particular place, in Beis HaMikdash, in the temple, or within the temple, namely the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies? We mentioned as well, we spoke about this last week, it was very evident, overtly evident, the presence of the Shechina in the place of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But the question is, why so? Apparently, everywhere, Hashem is everywhere. To note, there was a story, I believe it was with the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, when he was a child. So one of the Chassidim wanted to challenge him, if you will, and he told him, it could be it was a Frierdiker Rebbe, it could be it was the Rebbe Rashab, when either of them were children, and either of them was a child, and he said, he says, I'll give you in Yiddish it would be called a zukerker, which is like a candy, a sweet. And if you tell me where Hashem is, without skipping a beat, he responded, I'll give you two, little child, I'll give you two if you tell me where Hashem is not. This was resonated so clearly in the mind and heart of the child. Naturally, this child became the Rebbe eventually. The Gemara said, "Butzin mikat fi'idiyah." This is a different carve out, a different. You have even a Rebbe. It's a different dynamic on the onset. But the message is, "Lesasar panim minei." There's no place which is devoid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what does it mean, Ashras Hashchina? There you have the dwelling of the divine presence. What about anywhere else, out of the domain of the temple or out of the domain of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies? Hashem is everywhere. That was basically the question, and Alter Rebbe comes in to a mushal. He goes into a whole parable. Metaphor over here, the way the neshama enters into the body. Now we don't mean neshama, we mentioned last week as well, the godly soul, but we mean the soul, which gives, it's called the nefesh chayunis. It's called the nefesh bahamis, also that same soul, but it's the vitalizing soul, the soul, the energy, which gives man. It's a soul which nefesh ha'adam, the lashon in Bereshit, it's bedam ha'adam. It enters into the body, into the blood, which the blood is the perfect conducive material, so to say, within the blood is kind of an interface. It has that ability to absorb the koach of the nefesh and pass it on to the entire body, and the person becomes a living human being. So this nefesh, he says, where is the as a nefesh, as it says, the nefesh enters the body. It says, true, it gives every part, every limb, every organ, its ability to function, especially dealing with a healthy human being. that everything functions, every detail you see, it's a detail which is alive, but nonetheless, and the main habitat, the main domain where the nefesh resides is in the brain, which we know is the nerve system. The nerve system, that's the reason why this is there is the nerve system, or the reason why in the brain you have everything, as we mentioned last week, the brain is not only a vital organ, but the brain, that's where it's beyond being a vital organ, like heart or liver and so on. That's where this is the station, the main station, if you will, where the nefesh enters, and from the meichin, from that nerve system, it passes the energy throughout the entire body. From the brain, which is the ikir mishkan, it's the main, namely the place where the nefesh resides, and then it comes into the entire body. So we did say nefesh habasa b'dami, it's in the blood. The Alter Rebbe also has this idea that there's a stream of blood that enters into the brain as well, but it's not a contradiction, because the blood is where it picks up. Blood picks up on the energy of the nefesh and passes it on to every limb. But where is the station? Where's the main station of the nefesh? Is in the brain. Again, this is the nerve system. Again, we took the time last week to explain a little longer. We were learning these very words here, Perek and Aleph, and you can see it. It's a click away. You see the information of this very beginning of Perek and Aleph, as well as the previous chapters on this very Tanya online, one word, tanyaonline.com website, and it's easy to follow. As we note again for the newcomers, that it's easy to follow because the as the text is on a separate scroll bar than the class, and so too you have easy access to all the previous classes from the very beginning of Tanya, which come up as we mentioned, come up in the same fashion. Again, a separate scroll bar for the screen, as such easy to follow accordingly. And we were holding over here page Ayin Aleph, V'hinei ein shinu. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is 4 lines here. We stop by the dot. The 4 lines on the bottom of the page. 4 lines at the bottom of the page in the original text. Page Ayin Aleph. Page Ayin Aleph in the original text. You can see it in their corresponding English text as well. So too on this very website. So we will continue. Now, we just want to mention Halavai. We hope that we'll be able to finish tonight even the mashal. We did mention last week that Alter Rebbe takes almost a page and a half, and he elaborates in detail, much detail, and the mashal, this metaphor, to which would lead into the message of the Alter Rebbe. He began, "From my flesh I know God," which will explain us, answered the question which the Alter Rebbe asked. What does it mean, the dwelling of the divine presence in one particular place? It doesn't mean one to the exclusion of two. In other words, in a particular place. And the shul, the Beis Hamikdash, we know the Beis Hamikdash itself, there was different levels. The core of the energy of the Shekhinah was in the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, but so too in the Kodesh. That's why it's called Kodesh. The Heichel and the Bein Olam Mizbeach. There was different levels of Kedusha. And even today, the shul, the minyan, a person learns Torah. It says, "Menayna fil shachad yeshiv esek batera." Shechina imay, the Shechina is with him as well. The Shechina shrui, the Shechina dwells. There are different levels. There's 1, 3, and 5. You look at it, as we see it in the Pirkei Avos, how many people assemble together to learn Torah. Then there's the dynamic of a minyan, and so this. With this, he's going to explain ultimately this question. This which the Alter Rebbe points out in the beginning of the Perek, this misunderstanding about this idea of Shras HaShechina, he's going to explain. So the Alter Rebbe felt very compelled, despite we mentioned, as similar to Torah Shebiksav. Generally, Alter Rebbe comes across with extremely, everything is explained thoroughly throughout the Tanya. It is Chassidus Chabad per se, but in the same token, it has this Torah Shebiksav dynamic, and therefore usually it comes out, it's presented relatively to other Chassidus, even of the Alter Rebbe, in a manner of brevity, in the context of things. As could you compare the Arichas, the elaboration of the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah and Torah compares to the Tanya? You can't. So to the Alter Rebbe's myriads of Sifrei Chassidus, which the Alter Rebbe, the Memorim of the Alter Rebbe himself, and then the Mittel Rebbe, it was, in comparison to the Tanya, all these discourses are written in great expansion and great elaboration, and all the Rebbeim, the Rebbe Rashab and Tapish Samach Vav, and Aybeis, with such extensive and detailed elaborations on these matters, same matters of Chassidus. I mean, not everything is particularly focused exactly taking a word of Tanya and explaining, but generally there's an arichus, a great sense of expansion in comparison to the Tanya itself, which this is the Teda Shebiksav of Chassidus. And we're saying this because it's interesting that just for the example, the metaphor over here, the Alter Rebbe takes a page and a half, literally, just to explain us the example. And he had a reason for that, because he wanted us to understand it thoroughly, that we should be able to appreciate the message which he's trying to convey adequately and accurately, rather. And in order to have that appreciation of the message, the Alter Rebbe felt that he's going to elaborate, he needs to elaborate much on the mashal, on the parable. So it's another page. Let's see how long we can come into the conclusion of the mashal itself. But let's see. Again, the fourth line from the bottom of page Pei Aleph. Ein shine kabbalas hakayches v'chayis shebavarei aguf min haneshama tzad atzmo u'mohusa shehi mohusa v'atzmusa mischalek l'ramach chavlokim sheinim mislapshim l'ramach mekem is gefitzir chelkim mekem is every aguf. You can say, even though this neshama, this nefesh, again, we're not talking about the nefesh alikis, the godly neshama, but the nefesh which gives life to the body. And we said it enters into every single limb, and it gives the ability to every single limb to function with the style of that particular limb. For example, the eye to see. The eyeball has a certain makeup that it has the ability to see, and it needs the energy of the nefesh to enter into that eyeball, and when they both come together, the person is able to see. And so too when it comes to audio, there is the eardrum, which has a certain makeup. This is the makeup of the body, and when the nefesh enters, it doesn't mean at two separate times, and there's the combination of the energy of the nefesh with the eardrum, so then there is audio, the human being is able to hear, and so on every single limb. So one would suggest, perhaps, that the nefesh itself is also divided, because the nefesh has to enter so perfectly. It's not just like a splash of nefesh. We do appreciate that the limbs and the organs function of the body is very sophisticated and very complex, and every limb and every koyach, every faculty has its unique makeup, which is so distinct than another faculty, than another limb. Just the example we gave, we can't compare the eyeball to the eardrum. It's two different worlds in their makeup, in their physical makeup. Therefore, the energy which comes in from the nefesh into the eyeball, someone has to have a connection to the idea of vision as opposed to audio, hearing. Seeing as opposed to hearing, and so too the energy which comes into the eardrum has to have something within it which is associated with hearing as opposed to seeing. Understandably so. It's not the same energy just comes in. It's not just like one battery fits all. It's not so, as we know. So one would suggest, apparently as such, that the nefesh, these kaiches, this energy of the nefesh, is also subdivided. It's divided into how many divisions? 248 divisions, because it has to enter into 248 limbs. But Alter Rebbe makes it clear, make no mistake, the nefesh is not divided into 248 limbs on its own. It's only when it enters the body, and again it becomes part of, or enters the brain, which establishes the nerve system, and eventually from the nerve system all the energy enters into every single limb, every single organ, every single faculty in its perfect manner, and it establishes this organ and this limb to function optimally with that energy which came from it, and that energy definitely is distinct just to that particular keli, to the particular function, to the particular limb and organ that has to function in a certain manner. So certainly there is the koyach of riyah, but when does that koyach of riyah establish itself? It's only after the nefesh enters into the brain system, into the nerve system. Then the koyach of riyah, so to say, takes shape and enters into the eyeball, precisely into the eyeball and not into the eardrum, and vice versa. But the nefesh itself, prior to entering into the system of the person, we could all appreciate that it's not divided into 248 limbs. It's a ball and energy of light, and life. And this is what makes it clear. Ein shinui kabbalas hakayches v'chayis. The acceptance, in other words, the receiving of the kayches and the chayis, the energy which of the limbs of the body from the neshama on its own, would establish that the neshama itself, this nefesh itself, would be divided into 248 limbs, or to 248 parts, 248 types of energy, which it invests into 248 limbs of the body. In other words, the fact that it enters into the 248 limbs would suggest, in turn, that the nefesh itself is divided into 248 divisions, 248 types of energies, one distinct from the other, and then it fits into the 248 limbs. The Rebbe says it's not so. So then you'd say that the core of the nefesh has an image, like a physical image, and a physical structure, just like the image and the structure of the body. Because if you say that it's really divided on soul level prior to its entry into the body, that tells you one way or another that there's a certain similarity between the body and the soul. This is divided into 248 limbs, and so too the soul is divided into 248, so to say, levels of energy. Now, when you say it's divided, it doesn't mean that it has to look mamish physically like a body, but something close to it. Because if you say it's divided, this is not like that, that's not like that, that's not like that. Just like you look at the body, you see the eyes and the ears and every limb of the body. Because of its distinction, that's what builds the structure of the body. And it looks a certain way. It has a certain composure because of the distinction of every limb in comparison to the other limb. Every organ, every faculty with its distinction in comparison to any other limb and any other organ, any other faculty. Now, if you say that the same refers to by the neshama that is divided into 448, that tells you that the neshama has a certain image. You must say the neshama has a certain image, because if one energy is distinct than the other, means to say that there is somewhat of an image similar to the image of the keli, which is the guf, the body, which is also divided to 248. Can't say so. The Alter Rebbe even says chas v'shalom. And the question really, why is Alter Rebbe would use the terminology chas v'shalom when you're dealing with a nefesh of a hamis, nefesh of chayunis, because the Alter Rebbe is really somewhat alluding to the nimshal, to the message when it comes to Hashem, which comes in is mahava mechayim mekayim, gives life and energy to his creation or his emanation, everything which comes from Hashem, or everything Hashem decides to vitalize. And certainly you can't say Hashem has an image. There's no image to Hashem. It's a fundamental in Yiddishkeit. And learn a little bit, just a smell into Chassidus and a sniff into Chassidus. We don't have to know that this is even something which Torah even has to tell us, because it becomes so obvious that the Eibishter Hashem has no tziyur. And therefore the chas v'shalom really applies somewhat to the mashal, to the nimshal, to the message, but again, because this is a mashal, this is a metaphor to the message. So the Alter Rebbe says that it's impossible that this has an image similar to the image of the body, and we could all appreciate that. It's all one core, one spiritual energy, umufshut umikol tzir gashmi, and it's divested from any physical image, umibchinas v'geder mokim, umido ugvul gashmi, and from any distinction, place, measurement, limitation, physical place, physical limitation. Mitzad mahusa v'atzmusa, when you focus on the core of the nefesh. You cannot say on the core of the nefesh that it has a relationship with the brain of the head more than the feet, as an example. When you look at the nefesh prior to its entry into the body, now one would suggest, when is there a state prior? The person is born of nefesh and guf together. So when you look at it technically, certainly there's no really time you can say when the person is born. The moment he's born, he or she is born, the nefesh enters. Usually when we get to know the child, the fetus, then it's already the combination of both of them, body and soul. But there is a moment that the soul enters into the body, when he becomes a living being. So there is also different stages. When a fetus is in the womb of the mother, there are movements, and because there's movements, we must say that there's someone of the nefesh there. But nonetheless, it's not an independent child. It's when he comes out, gives the first scream, then it's an independent child. Everything turns around, it eats in a different way, and it lives in a very different manner. Even there themselves, there's different stages till the person grows up. But nonetheless, there becomes a separate entity. That's when the nefesh comes completely into the body. The person becomes a nefesh chai. The person becomes a living human being. But so he's not necessarily talking about that moment. He's talking about, if you conceptually, the nefesh on its own, pre-entry into the body, is a energy which is beyond definition, beyond distinction, beyond limitation, beyond measurement, beyond physical measurement, beyond physical limitation, and beyond even physical distinctions, because it's a nefesh which is a ball of life and energy, and therefore there's nothing within the nefesh you can say that really it has more connection to the meichin, to the brain, and more than the feet. No, because then again you're establishing a tzir, an image, into that nefesh, and the nefesh on its own has no tzir. Mi'achar, as we read on, because the core of the nefesh is not at all in the framework of physical place, physical limitation, physical distinction. The only things on a potential state, there are 613 different types of energies which are included in it, in its core, which means in its essence, there are potential 613 points of energy which eventually, as and only when it'll enter into the body, then this potential will come out and it kind of become distinct based, commensurate to the kelim of the body, commensurate to the kaiches, the limbs, the organs, the faculties of the body, which are divided into 248, or more specifically, the 613, as it's divided to 48 and 365. But it's not within the nefesh itself. It's when the nefesh comes into the body, then something happens. And what happens is, this which was, so to say, part in the nefesh itself, and stood only in a state of potentiality, not in a state of actuality, not at all for that matter. Because if it would have, again, we would, as we mentioned before, there would be something where the nefesh has a connection to meichin more than to raglayim, but it's not the case. To the brain more than to the feet, but it's not the case. It's mufshut, it's completely divested from any type of image. Not only from the broken down image into 613, as opposed to maybe it's just divided into 10, into 3, into 2, has an inclination or has something within it which is intrinsically connected to meichin, to the brain more than to the feet. It's not so. It's one ball of light, one ball of life, one ball of energy, divested from any type of image. And all these taryag koiches are standing in a total state of potential. that when this nefesh will enter into this keli, into this utensil, if you will, into this vessel called body, which is divided into 248, or again, more specifically in the 613 divisions, then the nefesh would function, it would kind of allow itself to give the particular function to every one of these limbs, organs, and faculties. And again, even then, it would kind of settle itself, and its primary focus would be in the brain and the nerve system, and then it would indeed shed off its life and its energy to every single part of the body with its specificity. And again, as we said before, there is a particular kayach, which is called the kayach hariyah, which enters into the eyeball and does not enter into the eardrum, and vice versa. But it's not to say that the nefesh, prior to its entry into the body, has that kayach, which is called something which is distinguishable, that it has that is called the kayach of riyah, and the kayach of shmiya, and the kayach of vision, the kayach of hearing, audio, and the kayach of hiluch, of walking, and so on and so forth, the kayach of understanding, the kayach of feeling, and again, the way it ultimately comes to expression as it enters the body. It has none of that at all. It's a one kayach, which is a core kayach of energy, which has all these 613, but not b'payil, but just b'kayach, in a state of potential, which again, the whole idea of potential is that it's totally abstract, totally divested from anything which you can pinpoint. When someone has a potential to do something, meaning to say there's nothing that anything or anybody can detect this potential that this individual has, because it stands in a state of non-expression. Because once it comes to even the most minimal type of expression, it's no more potential. It's an actual expression. It's an expression of actuality, not potentiality. And so too, when we speak about the 613 kayches, they stand in potential to one day or at a later stage, when it would enter the body, to come in a kayach alapayil, from a state of potential to actuality, in other words, to manifest itself in this body. That tells us that prior to entry into the body, as we can only appreciate, it's a one nefesh, just a strong, important and potent nefesh full of energy, or a nefesh which has all its strength and its potency, full of chayis, because this nefesh has the ability to vitalize an entire body, an entire sophisticated and complex system. But it's all one kayach, and all these taryag kayachas, as the Alter Rebbe says, there's klulayis ba, in a state of potential. That eventually, that when would they come to a state of expression? When would they come to a state of manifestation, from a state of concealment, total concealment? Once it enters into the body, then it again emerges from a state of potential to a state of actuality, to a state of revelation, to a state of manifestation, as it vitalizes again in detail the 248 limbs and the 365 sinews within the body, as it enters into the nefesh chayunis, which also has 248 and 365 kayches, and these chayis halalu. Now, I will just say, I'm reading these very words. Maybe that explains a little bit of the reason why the Alter Rebbe writes Chas v'Shalom before. Because as we're learning this till now, at least the way I understood it till now, that this nefesh is referring to the nefesh habahamis, to the nefesh chayunis. And therefore I always have a question when I come by here. It says Chas v'Shalom. Doesn't make sense really to say Chas v'Shalom on the nefesh chayunis, apparently. And my reconciliation is because Al Rebbe, it's kind of alluding to the fact that this is, yes, a mashal to a nimshal. There we could perfectly appreciate the expression of chas v'shalom. But I'm just learning now, and I never caught my eye, I must admit. Al Rebbe says that these kaiches, these 613 kaiches, which would come from the nefesh into the guf, he says this would come through investing in the nefesh chayunis, which also has this division of 248 and 365 kaiches. Now, why is it not, as the expression uses, galactic? Why isn't it galactic? Because if you think about it, the Rebbe is clearly saying in the very beginning that this nefesh, and this is why I always learned it in a way that we are talking about, in the onset, we're talking about the nefesh chayunis. Again, remember, we have the nefesh elikis, the godly soul, and then we have the animal soul, which is called the nefesh chayunis, the vitalizing soul, the soul which makes us alive and makes us function as healthy human beings. And the reason why I always understood it that way, at least till this moment where I could say I have a question, it's still not simple, because Al Rebbe says clearly that this nefesh gives the eye the ability to see, and the ear to hear, and the mouth to talk, the feet to walk. Again, in last week's class, and then when you think about the nefesh elikis, the godly soul is not about that at all. It just establishes that if the individual, this human being, this yid as an example, has a mouth to talk, it should talk divrei Torah, or things of meaning, things of significance, things of spiritual, which would lead to spiritual production. And if it has feet to walk, the nefesh elikis signal would tell it to walk to holy places and refrain from walking to non-holy places. And if it has the ability to see, to look only in things that Hashem permits us to look, encourage us to look at, which is namely use our eyes for Torah, for tefillah, and so on, and so too with our ears. And when you have the Alter Rebbe noting over here, in the last week's class, when he speaks about this neshama, nishmas ha'adam, when you learn especially in the beginning, as the Alter Rebbe starts with a mashal, it's very demonstrable, very indicative that the Alter Rebbe is talking about the nefesh chayunis, because he speaks about this which gives the ayin liros, doesn't say liros, spiritual vision, or to the investment of vision in spiritual matters. It just says to see, and so too when it comes to the ear to hear, the mouth to talk, the feet to walk, and so on and so forth. So it's puzzling a little bit. Well, the Alter Rebbe speaks about this nefesh and entering into the body. It says that it would invest in the nefesh chayunis, which also has 248 limbs and 365 kaiches. Now I will say, I will have to look into it, and I'll have to, Bez Hashem, next week get back to it. And like I said, it never caught my eye. We run through this chapter myriads of times over the years, and it never caught my eye. These words, I was always understanding that Islap Shusam, and again entering into the body, it never caught my eye, which says Benefesh Chayunis, which says it's another nefesh entering into the body via the Nefesh Chayunis. But we thought we were talking about the Nefesh Chayunis. So I'll have to get back to it, but we're going to go on, because eventually we will be able to understand the Alter Rebbe's message through even the way we're learning it, that the nefesh divested from body has no image. The image only comes about. And then you're not talking about a physical image, mamish, but even any type of image. The image comes about only after it invests in the body. When it invests in the body, this potential of vision and hearing and walking, all this comes from a state of potential to a state of actuality. So then we go on in Vehine al Hamshoches kol taryag mini keiches, on the Hamshacha of all the 613 keiches. In other words, the drawing, the involving of all the 613 keiches, V'chayis and their life and their energy mi'ahelam and neshama laguf, from the concealed state of the neshama to the body, lachiyesei, to give it life. Aleh amru sheikir mishkana v'shrasa sham shachazu v'gilui zeu kuli mechid b'mechid sheberosh. Only after it enters into the system and it starts expressing all these 613 expressions, commensurate to the keli of the 613 divisions which exist in the body, there and then, and only at that point, and only in that juncture, do we say that the main residence, inhabitant of this nefesh is in the brain over any other limb, which again, known to us as the nerve system. That only transpires after the nefesh enters into the system. There we say that its primary station is the brain, not before, because before, as we said before, because it's divested of any image, there's nothing could say, well, I'm more connected to brain more than to foot. That says that you have a particular image, a particular expression. Because if not, why are you inclined to be or part of the brain, the nerve system, more than the walking system? Because you have an image. In other words, the only way that the neshama would have an inclination to the nerve system more than to the raglayim, to the feet, is because that there would be an actual manifestation of an image. And that doesn't exist on neshama levels divested of body. So the whole notion of the nefesh being its primary residual within the system would be in the meichin sheberosh, as opposed to any other place, which is the nerve system, and then only then from the nerve system everything would be manifesting again to all the different limbs, begins only when the nefesh actually enters into the body. This is the interpretation of these words. Only then we say that Ikir Mishkana Vashrasa Sham Shachazu is in the Mechan Sheberosh. And therefore and therefore the brain receives primarily the energy which is befit to them based on the makeup of the brain, which is Chabad, which is Chochma Bina Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Again, we mentioned many times there's other descriptions, but generally known as wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. What is the difference of the three faculties? You can see it in Perek Gimel, the third chapter. We had it quite a few times. But in the third chapter, that is the place where the Alter Rebbe explains the function and the distinction of these three cognitive faculties. Chochma, the Bina, the Das. Each one extremely distinct, very distinct from the other. So the brain, the neshama actually enters, and they receive their koyach, the chabad of the chochma bina das, which is naturally the makeup of the brain, receive their energy, and primarily they receive primarily the energy from the nefesh, because the nefesh ikir mishkana, the main residual of the nefesh, is in the brain. And therefore they receive first the mekayach hamachshav, and so too the kayach to think, v'chol hashayich l'meich, anything which is associated with the intellectual cognitives. And not only it receives its kayach, but more so, as we say, that's the point of the nerve system, that the entire package, which eventually would evolve in the whole entire structure of the body, is all packaged within the brain. Again, that's the point. Another way of saying the nerve system. What's the nerve system? The nerve system is that all the kaichas and the nefesh, which eventually would be relevant and pertinent to the body in its detail, and in its specific detail, are all in the brain itself. In other words, not only the brain would receive its kaichas primarily because the ikir mishkana, the main residual of the nefesh, is in the brain, so the brain would take the first, again the chochma, the bina, the das, anything associated with the intellect, as he includes keich hamachshava, the keich of thought, which we can all appreciate is associated with the intellect, but more so, he says, all the amshachta l'chayis to all the other limbs are also packaged and invested in the brain. There is the main source of this hamshacha. In a way of the manifestation of the light and the energy of the entire neshama. And from there, and only from the brain, again, it's another way of saying the nerve system, comes all this ha'ara comes to all the other limbs, and each one receives its energy and its vitality, which is fitted to it, based on the makeup of the keli. As we said, the keli itself is very distinct. And even in this example, which is a very accurate example, because we're dealing with the eyeball, for example, the eyeball is very nuanced and very sophisticated type of limb, as we can only appreciate, and so distinct than any other limb, including the eardrum, which is also a sensitive limb, a sensitive organ. And each one receives kifi mizga yutchanase based on their particular makeup. Kayachariya mizkala be'ayin, the vision is revealed, it becomes manifest in the eye. V'kayachashmiya ba'ezen, and so too the hearing is revealed, is manifest in the ear. Again, coming, it's already packaged, it's all settled in the brain. Again, knowing the nerve system, and from the brain, all the other limbs receives. Naturally, he's not going to go through all the 613, but he sets two kaiches, two faculties, important faculties through which the human being functions. If it's the kaichari and the kaichashmiya, the vision and audio, which again the keli is distinct, the ayr hariya is distinct. In other words, the energies which allows the eyeball to see is a distinct energy associated with the vision. The energy which allows the ear to hear is associated with audio, associated with hearing, and that's why it enters and it fuses together and merges together, or it gives the chayas to that particular organ. But again, after it's settled in the brain. And all the keiches come from the brain, as it's known, because there is the main residual of this neshama in its totality, in a revealed way, that the general energy of the neshama is revealed there, which comes and is evolved from there. Meaning, the main mishkan, the residual of the neshama, is in a revealed fashion. In other words, the klolos hachayis, the entire package of chayis, the vitality of the neshama, enters there, and from there it would be manifest in the entire body. They're called klol kechisel. In this case, rather, it translated exact. Mispashet mimeno, which comes from the nefesh, is all in the brain in a revealed manner. That's what he's saying. And the only thing is, from the brain, kechisel shel kol zachayis, the keches of the chayis, meirim mispashtim mishom. Here he speaks about the misham, it shines and it's manifest and evolves from there to all the limbs of the body. Like the similarity of the light which evolves and is becomes manifest from the sun and shines into many different chambers. One sun shining and illuminating many different chambers. And similarly so when it comes to the nefesh, which resides in its entirety in the brain, and from there all the limbs receive it. Alter Rebbe concludes the mashal, even the vital organ, the heart, also receives from the brain. And therefore, and we'll finish with this. Thank God we were able to reach the end of the mashal itself. Thank God we were able to reach the end of the parable, so we can go right away into the message, which will end up explaining us this question which the Alter Rebbe had in the very beginning of Perek Nun Aleph, as a Tosfos beer is an additional explanation to the Yenuka's words regarding Asheras HaShechina, the dwelling of the divine presence. But the Alter Rebbe says something interesting over here, that one of the fundamentals of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, Likutei Amorim, throughout, that man is created in a way that Mayach Shalta Lalev. My heart was just telling me, sending me signals, and it went out of control, and what could I have done? No. man, human being, even prior to being a yid and having the oil, the yoke of Torah, mitzvahs, and Kabbalah Machal Shamayim, which that itself should keep the yid intact, chas v'shalom, never to fall prey to the nefesh habahamis, meaning to say the nefesh habahamis should never have any authority over his action, speech, and even thought, eyes, ears, and so on. But the Alter Rebbe establishes again at the fundamental in Likutei Amarim that as a human being, mind governs over heart, and therefore prior to your Kabbalah's El Torah mitzvahs, as a human being, it is unjustifiable ever to say, "Oh, my heart took over, and there was a loss of control, and my mind could not control and govern my heart." No, man is created in a way. The human being is created in a way that mind governs over heart. Again, we spoke about in those prokim, namely the first chapters of Tanya, especially when he speaks about the Beinani from Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet, Tezvav, and onwards, and namely those chapters where he defines the Beinani. And again, it's a very vital and fundamental point that the Alter Rebbe presents there in these chapters as a human being, which again refers to any human being, Jew, non-Jew alike. Mayich shalt lev. Why? Because the lev also receives its chayis, the way, the makeup of the and connection of the heart to the nefesh is in such a way that the entire nefesh enters the meichin, and from there all the limbs receive. And guess what? The heart is also a recipient, a receiver from the mayach. Lev mikabel meha mayach. So you're receiving from the mayach. So who's by definition in charge? All the energies in the mayach, and therefore mayach shalit oldov bitul dosei. By birth, it's innate, it's inherent that the mayach mind governs over heart. We look forward again as we conclude the mashal to get into the nimshul accordingly. Have a wonderful night.